today's program. Everyone should have just gotten a notification that we are recording today's town hall, and we'll be able to share it with folks after the town hall wraps. So what are we going to cover today? We are first going to get a welcome from Senator Bob Casey, the senator from Pennsylvania, who champions the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act for 10 years. And so he's going to wish us a warm welcome. Then we're going to move into what is the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, and how will it help me and my family and my community? And I'm going to turn it over to our co-founder and co-president, Dina Bax, and amazing community advocates that are here today to talk with us a little bit about that. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about hypotheticals and ways to really use the law and make sure that it's working for everyone and that everyone is getting the utmost protection out of it. Then we're going to talk a little bit more about the grassroots activism that got this law passed. And we're going to do that for two reasons. One, it's really important for everyone to know that it was parents and it was people on the ground who helped get this law passed, and will help for future movements too. But it's also important because grassroots activism doesn't end when legislation happens. And we really need to think about how to maintain that grassroots support to get the word out about the law. And we'll have some exciting information to share there too. And then we'll move into questions, because we want to make sure to leave plenty of time, because we know a lot of folks have questions about how the new law can work for them in their communities. And then we'll wrap. And I just want to share as well that you may hear us refer to resources or other pieces of information that could be helpful to you. We don't want anyone to feel like they won't have these resources at their fingertips. We will be sharing a follow-up email with everyone so that you have all these resources readily available, and you don't have to worry about taking notes during the webinar itself. And with that, I'm going to move into our welcome from Senator Casey. Okay, I'm hearing from some folks that we can't hear the video, so I'm going to pause for one moment and make sure that we can.
Just thank you all for joining this town hall on the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, which will go into effect on June 27th of this year. I'm excited to share more information about this new law, which took 10 years to pass, quite a long time, despite how straightforward and common sense this law is. Here's how it works. Often pregnant women need reasonable accommodations just to keep working. That means a stool for a worker who's on her feet all day, the ability to keep a water bottle nearby, or something as basic as extra bathroom breaks. Under this new law, pregnant workers will go to their employer and seek an accommodation that must be reasonable under the law. So what's reasonable in one workplace may not be reasonable in another. So it's kind of a case-by-case determination. The law applies to workplaces of 15 employees or more. Now, employers have been providing these so-called reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities for 33 years under the Americans with Disabilities Act, the so-called ADA. So this is a time-tested concept. Employers know how to do this. And over those 30 plus years, employers have worked this out with their employees. So all we're asking for here, when we're trying to pass the bill, is to have the same standard for workers who are pregnant. So this act simply provides the same type of protection to pregnant workers as we've provided for a third of a century to workers who have a disability. When women can keep working while maintaining healthy pregnancies, they can stay in the workplace longer. That means they can keep earning a paycheck to support their growing families, or they don't have to use up their leave before their babies are born. This law is good for workers, it's good for families, and it's good for the employer. So I'm proud we finally got it over the finish line. It took too long, but we got it done. And I want to thank you all for your support over the last decade to get us there, to get this passed. You're going to learn more today about the law, what it means for pregnant workers, and how you can help spread the word so that everyone knows about the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. So I hope you all will join me in helping get the word out about this law and the new protections afforded to pregnant workers. So thank you, and God bless your work. Thank you all for joining this.
So thank you so much, Senator Casey, for joining us in your incredible leadership on the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act over the past decade. My name is Dina Bax, and I'm co-founder and co-president of A Better Balance, and I am overjoyed that after a decade-long fight, the Pregnant Worker Fairness Act, as you just heard, will be going into effect on June 27th. So I'm just going to provide a bit more context to Senator Casey's remarks and explain the problem the PWFA set out to solve. So back in 2011, A Better Balance, we were seeing a really disturbing pattern on our helpline and in the case law. Pregnant workers, especially those who are in low wage and flexible and physically demanding jobs, male-dominated jobs, were routinely being forced off the job instead of being granted, as you heard, these temporary accommodations they needed to protect their health. And they often face truly devastating health or economic consequences as a result. So I will never forget, for example, the pregnant retail worker who wound up in the ER after she fainted and collapsed on the retail floor because her employer wouldn't allow her to carry a water bottle on the job. Or the pregnant desk clerk who asked for a few minutes to sit down during her 9-hour shift. Her employer not only denied her request, but she was pushed out of her job and wound up on public assistance. Or another worker who was advised to stop lifting heavy boxes for a few months, a very common scenario, advised by her doctor to help prevent another miscarriage. But her employer refused to temporarily transfer her, and she wound up homeless 3 weeks before childbirth. Look, this was happening in large part because pregnant and postpartum workers lacked what you heard, a clear affirmative right to accommodations under federal civil rights law to stay healthy and attached to the workforce. The 1978 Pregnancy Discrimination Act, which intended to eliminate pregnancy discrimination, only bans pregnancy discrimination, but it only entitles to pregnant workers an accommodation if they can point to others similar inability to work who've been accommodated. But really, why should a pregnant worker have to jump through legal hoops and muster evidence of discrimination in order to get a time-sensitive accommodation they need to protect their health? I think we can all agree they shouldn't. And we know that even when they do try, our research has shown most of the time they lose. And as you heard, the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, does guarantee workers with disabilities an accommodation. But what we have seen over the years is that even workers with serious pregnancy-related medical needs have routinely been excluded from coverage. So women with serious pregnancy-related bleeding, severe nausea, even preeclampsia, which is one of the 3 leading causes of maternal mortality in this country, have all been deemed by courts not to rise to the level of a disability. Not to mention accommodations necessary to prevent pregnancy or postpartum complications like extra water or bathroom breaks to prevent a UTI. So I think we can all agree that no worker should be forced to choose between a healthy pregnancy or a safe recovery from childbirth and a paycheck. Pregnancy accommodations are good for women, for families, and our economy. And really, in the midst of a raging maternal health crisis in this country, especially for Black women, we should really be doing everything we can to ensure workers can take greater steps to protect their health. So thankfully, we are here today. We're not just demanding action. We actually have a law that is going into effect, the Pregnant Worker Fairness Act. Congressman Nadler in the House, introduced this bill in 2012, a few months after I had written an op-ed in the New York Times laying out the problem. And it's taken over 10 years of tireless advocacy from a broad and diverse coalition set of stakeholders to get the bill over the finish line. One key strategy from the day one has been working moms speaking out, demanding action. And I am incredibly honored and proud to introduce one of our fiercest champions, Natasha Jackson, a working mom and ABB community advocate from South Carolina. Natasha.
Natasha, I think you're on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, if I cry today, they're happy tears. I get a little emotional every time I have to tell the story. So I was working at a local rental furniture store, and I asked to do heavy lifting, and I thought it was going to be an easy yes. However, I lost my job. At the time I was married, and our primary breadwinner had just made a down payment on a home, but without my income, we couldn't afford it. So we had to back out of everything. And in a matter of months, I ended up needing emergency public housing, and we were homeless. But the law wasn't on my side at the time. That's why I joined a Better Balance. And over the last 10 years, I've joined other moms to share our stories in support of the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. So what happened to us wouldn't happen to anyone else. I testified, wrote in an op-ed, spoke at rallies, and most recently I had the honor of introducing President Biden at the White House after the law passed, which I still feel like I wasn't there. I have 2 daughters and nieces. I'm so grateful that they and millions of other workers won't have to choose between starting a family and keeping their jobs. I'm so excited to be here today to talk about the new law and spread the word among moms and parents. I've had the opportunity to help women in my community get the changes they need to stay safe and working while pregnant. And I know together we can make sure parents in all 50 states know about their exciting new rights under the law going into effect on June 27th of this year. Thank you for, again, allowing me to tell my story over these last 10 years. And I'll turn it back over to Dina now.
Thank you so much, Natasha, again, for your incredible leadership. I'd now like to turn it over to Namati Mansoray from MomsRising. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dina. It is my pleasure to introduce Brianne Smith. She's an advocate and a MomsRising member from Marion, North Carolina.
Hey, everybody. My name's Brianne Smith, like Namati said, and I'm from North Carolina. I recently moved to Marion about 5 years ago. I'm a mom to 2 amazing kids. You see their picture right there. They're actually sleeping in the other room. And I know firsthand why Pregnant Workers Fairness Act is so essential. And I appreciate the chance to be able to share my story today. I had been working for a small nonprofit going on 8 years when I found out I was pregnant. And it was huge, exciting news for me and my husband, and it was a dream come true. We found a house, a farm to live on, and I was excited to tell my supervisors, who felt like family to me after the 8 years I'd been there. But I was really disappointed when they didn't share my excitement. It really seemed more like an inconvenience than, you know, some exciting news of their employee. I love my job, and I was really good at it. Like I said, I was there for almost 8 years, and I'd taken on significant responsibility in what I did, and I had never received a formal corrective action of any kind. Never even conversations about my performance. I worked more than 40 hours a week, and I was always on my feet, just constantly working. I tried to be extremely communicative with my supervisors, who I said were like family to me. And I knew they were reasonable accommodations and I could continue to succeed in my job. But suddenly everything started to become a fight. One issue I really struggled with was rest. If any of you have children, you know how tired you are. And during my pregnancy, I was just exhausted all the time. And there was a point about the same time every day when I needed to just take a quick break to lay down or recharge in my office. I would always notify my supervisor when I got to that point, and I would always clock out, and it didn't interfere with my work at all. But staff actually took pictures of me while I was sleeping and sent them to my supervisor. which immediately became a big problem. Then one thing after the other just started to surmount, and every single hiccup I had for the next 4 months became a huge deal in a way that I had never experienced in my almost 8 years there. One fateful day, they finally brought me into the HR office and they said that they were relieving me of my position. I asked for concrete reasons why, and they didn't really have the dignity to give me that. They just kept saying it was mounting job performance issues. And at that time, I was 5 months pregnant. And I can't describe how terrible it was to lose my job when I was a soon-to-be mom. We had just closed on the farmhouse that we are now living in. We closed the month before I was fired, and I had to apply for WIC, SNAP, and every type of support I could. I finally got Medicaid after a month of being uninsured while pregnant. It's not fun. I also tried to apply for unemployment, but the company that fired me has to approve your application, as you know, and they wouldn't do that. So that was a whole other fight that I had to undergo to get unemployment. It was a devastating situation, to say the least, and I don't want anyone to have to face what I did. It was very traumatic. I wish I'd had more protections at work, and that's why I'm really thrilled that Congress finally passed the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. It guarantees the reasonable accommodations needed to stay well during a pregnancy. That includes adequate time for rest, things like bathroom breaks, flexibility for prenatal appointments, and even just the ability to carry a water bottle. No one should have to fight for those basic needs. This law is a huge win for families and for public health, and it's also good for our economy because it helps new parents stay attached to the workforce. And now it's up to us to spread the word so everyone knows their rights. And I'm proud to be part of the movement that protects pregnant and postpartum workers and ensures working families have what they need to thrive. The Pregnant Workers Fairness Act is a tremendous step forward in that fight, and I really thank you for having me. Thanks, Dina.
Thank you so much for your powerful story and for joining us today. So I'm just going to jump right in and again, jump into the details a little bit about what the law provides. So I think you've all heard speakers talk about the law. The PWFA must guarantee reasonable accommodations. The specific words is to work with known limitations related to pregnancy, childbirth, or related medical conditions, unless the accommodation would pose an undue hardship on the employer. Reasonable accommodations, as you heard from Senator Casey, and undue hardship are very familiar concepts to employers. It's actually one of the reasons the United States Chamber of Commerce and other leading business associations have been so supportive of the law. Employers also can't force you out onto unpaid leave or force you to accept an accommodation if you don't need, if you know that you may not need, right? What they must do is they must engage in a timely, good faith, interactive process with you. Again, this is a very familiar process as required under the ADA. So HR and your company should be familiar with this to identify an accommodation that meets your needs. So the bottom line is employers need to consider your requests. They're not required to accommodate you if it imposes an undue hardship, but they can't just force you out. They can't just fail to speak to you. They need to consider your requests. Throughout your pregnancy, I think the important point to recognize here is every person is different, and and needs are, range from you may need 0 changes during your pregnancy or after childbirth to help you stay healthy and keep your jobs. It may just be a job that it all works just great, which is awesome. But you may be experiencing a range of pregnancy-related conditions or of medical needs that do trigger the need for accommodation. So, for example, you may be experiencing severe nausea, dehydration, extreme heat, pain in your lower belly, or physical effects of recovering from childbirth, that trigger the need for modest changes to your job duties or responsibilities for a period of time. So what are some common examples of reasonable accommodations? You can look here on the list. This is not an exhaustive list, but you'll see here light duty, very common, or help with manual labor or lifting. a temporary transfer, right? Additional, water breaks or restroom breaks, time off or flexible scheduling to attend pre or postnatal appointments. Hugely important in a world where, millions of workers don't even have access to a single, paid sick day. But here, it's not guaranteed paid, but it's the job protected time off to attend these crucial appointments that you need to protect your health. Time off to recover from childbirth, miscarriage, bed rest, right? So these are changing to food or drink policies, making facilities easier to use. Perhaps you're, a police officer and you need a larger uniform, or change to the dress code, or you need to modify your work schedule slightly, including remote work or accommodations for lactations needs. Again, these are the same standard. These are types of accommodations that an employer must consider that you may need for a defined period of time, unless they pose an undue hardship for your employer. And I really want to just emphasize the point that employers can't force you out on leave if you need an on-the-job accommodation, but leave is a reasonable accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And here too, leave is a reasonable accommodation under the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. And that does include, that time off to recover from childbirth. So just a few other points before I turn it over to my colleague. As you've heard many times, this law goes into effect on the 27th. It aligns with Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. So it applies to people who work for the government and for private employers with at least 15 employees. And punishing you for asking or using an accommodation is illegal. So even if they ultimately can't give you the accommodation, you can't be, retaliated against is really the big word for asking, for the accommodation. And just to note that, employers have additional obligations under other laws, such as the Family and Medical Leave Act, state and local sick time and family leave laws and disability laws. All those laws remain on the books, and it's really important to take those into account if if they perhaps could be triggered. But and also, workers must file complaints with the EEOC before bringing a lawsuit. So with that, I am going to turn it over to my colleague Sarah Brockman to say more. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Dina, and thank you, Natasha and Brianne and Namati as well. So we wanted to sort of get into a little bit of, well, what does it look like? Okay, you know that you need an accommodation, and how do you actually ask for one? So let's take an example here of Rosa. Rosa's pregnant and she needs to avoid lifting over 20 pounds at her job. So how should Rosa go about asking for an accommodation? Well, first things first, Rosa should go to her boss and explain that she has a pregnancy-related limitation, right? In order to protect the health of her pregnancy, she needs to avoid lifting over 20 pounds because that could lead to pregnancy complications. And she doesn't have to use any magic words. She doesn't have to say, hello, supervisor, I need a reasonable accommodation. She just has to say, I'm pregnant, I have this need, I don't want to jeopardize the health of my pregnancy, and I need help with lifting. And it's also beneficial for Rosa to say, for Rosa to tell her boss, I think I'm going to need this lifting accommodation for X amount of time, right? Let's say she's 6 months pregnant until after she gives birth, just to give your employer as much clarity as possible. The other thing is that the whole point of the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act is about having a conversation with your employer and landing on an accommodation that works. It doesn't mean your employer has to give you the very first accommodation you come with. Of course, it's really good to come prepared with a couple of ideas about how they can accommodate, but it's also good to be open-minded to what your employer comes back to you with, right? So Rosa might suggest, having someone fill in for her at this specific time, and her employer might come back and say, well, this employee, I think, doesn't have the bandwidth to do that, but I'm thinking of this employee, or let's put you onto a different position with the same pay, et cetera. But a transfer might be better than just reprieve from lifting. So it's a back and forth conversation. And I think it's also really good because, like Dina said, the law says employers have to provide reasonable accommodations unless it would be an undue hardship. Undue hardship is a high barrier for employers to meet. It's also case specific, but it's always good to be able to explain to your employer that what you're asking for is as basic as possible, and it shouldn't be too difficult for them because you've already thought about ways that they can help accommodate you. Now, what happens if your boss or supervisor is not amenable? Well, if you have an HR, if you have personnel, if you have an employee health advisor, put your request in writing to them, right? It shouldn't necessarily stop just with your manager. It's important that you get what you need. And if there are others you can go to, putting your request in writing to HR would be helpful as well. You can also go straight to HR if that's preferable to you too. Now, if again, you're met with resistance, help is out there. So call or email us at A Better Balance. Like Dina said, we run a free and confidential legal helpline to talk with workers about all their questions and really your personal situation, to provide information about what might work in your particular case. So we really want to encourage folks to reach out to us and call. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission also obviously is the agency enforcing the law. They take and investigate complaints. But we want you to know that we're here to help as well and help talk through all of your options with you and really try to help you figure out how to get what you need in the quickest amount of time, because we know often these requests are really time sensitive. So that's kind of the general process, but I want to talk about an example because, again, it's called the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. So a lot of folks think that it just relates to protections during pregnancy. But as Dina spoke about, these protections are for pregnancy and postpartum needs. And time off to recover from childbirth is one of those protections. So another example, let's take Rosa again. If Rosa's 6 months pregnant, she's been working at her employer for a few months now, but by the time that she gives birth, she'll only have worked for her employer for 10 months. And she's not qualified for any sort of leave under the Family and Medical Leave Act because it has fairly stringent requirements. For those that don't know, the Family and Medical Leave Act only provides unpaid job protected leave if you've worked at your employer for at least a year, and if your employer is a certain size, over 50 or over, and you have to work more than 1,250 hours a year. So there's a variety of strict eligibility requirements. So how can the PWFA help Rosa? Well, like Tina mentioned, time off that is job protected to recover from childbirth can be an accommodation under the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, so long as it doesn't impose an undue hardship on employers. And so it's really important to think about the wide scope of accommodations that could be available to folks, especially because for some people who don't have protection under the Family and Medical Leave Act, this could be really critical because, again, the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act covers those who work for employers with 15 or more. It covers full-time workers, it covers part-time workers. You don't have to have worked at your employer for a certain amount of time in order to get these protections. You have those protections on day one. The other thing that's really important is you may, in fact, have a paid leave policy through your employer, or you may have paid leave through a state program. However, it's not necessarily guaranteed that you have job protection under those paid leave programs, depending the type of paid leave program it is. So it's important that you know that there is a law in place that could actually give you that job protection, even if in fact you do have a paid leave policy that's just an employer policy. And so I know we ran through a lot of this fairly quickly, but again, just want to reinforce that help is out there. I'm putting here the number for our helpline, the number for our Get Help page, which has an email form that you can fill out. Please share that widely in your communities, because we want to be here every step of the way with you to answer questions and help guide you through this process, because we know it can be a challenging time and can be challenging to talk with your employer about your needs. The other thing I want to flag before we move back into how we can all get the word out and what grassroots activism looks like here is that the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act also covers protections for pumping and for expressing milk and lactation related needs, like Dina mentioned. And so that can be everything from break time and space to if you need time off because you have mastitis, and any sort of, or if you need a uniform change because your uniform is not fitting appropriately while you're pumping, or you need something that allows you to pump better, then the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act is there for you. Another new law that passed is the Pump for Nursing Mothers Act, and that law guarantees break time, reasonable break time, and a clean private space to pump at work. So you now have actually two new rights, the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act and the Pump for Nursing Mothers Act, which give you really strong rights in order to pump at work and to breastfeed after giving birth. So we just wanted to flag those as well. We'll provide some information on that in our follow-up too, so that you have those as well. And now we're going to turn back a little bit to how this law got passed, a little bit about the decade-long fight and the grassroots activism. I want to remind folks that we are going to talk about this, and then we're going to take questions at the end. So please feel free to start putting your questions in the Q&A, and we will get to as many questions as we can before the hour is up. So as many folks have mentioned already, it took 10 years to pass the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. What you're seeing are photos from a rally that we held in December of last year, where we stood in front of Congress and we demanded that they bring the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act to a vote. This bill was hugely bipartisan. There were Democrats and Republicans that had come together, and we just needed Congress to make the time to bring the bill to the floor and vote on it so that mothers and all pregnant people could have these protections. And so a little bit, and we're not going to talk too much about this, but we just wanted to give folks a timeline, because 10 years is a long time to fight for a piece of legislation. But we were busy in those 10 years. So after Dina wrote her op-ed in the New York Times, Congress introduced the bipartisan, or it wasn't bipartisan at that time, but they introduced the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, which was a really exciting moment. But we knew that getting a piece of federal legislation over the finish line is a long undertaking. And so at the same time, we started to work on passing laws at the local and state level. And so starting in 2013, this concerted movement to pass further protections for pregnant and postpartum workers really began in earnest, with New York City being the first to pass a local Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. And after that, 4 more states followed suit in 2014. Then in 2015, we celebrated the first bipartisan introduction of the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act in Congress. And really, that was thanks to the fact that in the states, it was very bipartisan. Nearly all of the Pregnant Workers Fairness Acts at the state level passed unanimously, many with, and obviously that requires bipartisan support as well. From 2015 to 2018, we passed 14 more state PWFAs. And then the issue really began getting a lot of attention. And in 2018, the New York Times ran a front page article highlighting how many workers were being pushed out of work, especially highlighting a warehouse in Tennessee, featuring one of our clients, Tasha Morell, who was pushed out after she needed accommodation and ultimately, unfortunately, miscarried after lifting many heavy boxes. And it was really, really painful for her to have to go through this, of course. And it really was something that deserved a lot of attention and frankly, anger that this was happening in the United States of America in the 21st century. In 2019, we put out a report really showing why the law was not working for pregnant and postpartum workers, and highlighting the real problems in the law, which sparked a congressional hearing. After that, we had 3 years of passing 7 more state PWFAs, all across the country in states you might not expect, in Kentucky, in South Carolina, in Tennessee, in North Dakota, in Louisiana. So really exciting momentum, bipartisan, of course, again. Congress held a second hearing, and then we did a whole lot of shouting and pushing on lawmakers for PWFA to pass in December of 2022. And I'm going to turn it over to Eileen at Parents Together to talk a little bit more about what some of that grassroots activism looked like. Thanks, Eileen.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much, Sarah. And thank you, Brianne and Natasha, for sharing your stories and for fighting so hard for this to pass. It is really inspiring to hear. And, you know, our partners at A Better Balance and Moms Rising, you all have been fighting for over a decade to pass this, and we're so grateful to be standing together with you. My name is Eileen Arriaza. I'm the Executive Director of Parents Together. Parents Together is a multiracial cross-class organization that unites millions of parents across the country. And at Parents Together, we believe that the love that parents have for their children, for their babies, is the most powerful force in the universe. And we want to channel that into a force for change. And so we worked with our partners to do some grassroots activism around the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. So some of the things that we did was we created a ton of content around this. We have a huge reach on social media and amazing content creators on our team. So we created videos and social media pieces really talking about what parents needed and why this was important, and doing it in a way that felt really accessible. And one of the most exciting things we did was we used that content to also collect stories from our members. And so we heard some incredible stories of moms who had to pump in liquor cabinets at their restaurants where they worked, in storage rooms where they had, you know, folks walk in on them when they were wearing nothing but a breast pump because these accommodations did not exist. And then we turned that into more content so that people could really hear about the struggles and the solutions that were available to families. We also worked with influencers to help us spread that story. One influencer in particular that we love and work with is Vis Pihar, who does Under the Desk News. And they created some really compelling content about this and got thousands and thousands of their followers to sign a petition asking for the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act to pass. And then we turned that content and all the work that we did online into in-person activism. And these pictures that you can see here are some examples of that. We had this really amazing, our folks on our team, Sarah, who's on this call, helped organize this really amazing rally in New York that started as a march/music class in Park Slope. It was joyful, it was beautiful. And parents, about 50 parents and their kids, marched to Senator Schumer's house, showed up in the lobby and delivered thousands of petitions directly to his doorman, sending a message that, you know, parents are powerful. And this is something that is so important to pregnant workers and needs to pass. And then we also had some really powerful rallies at the Capitol, a stroller brigade, really creating momentum and drawing attention to the issue. And you can see that picture there. And then when this passed, we continue to tell this story because it's so inspiring and it's so wonderful to see in action the power that parents can have. And when we worked again with influencers and we told this story, the comments were filled with parents feeling so inspired and saying, "What's next? I'm ready to take on the next thing to make it easier for kids and families to thrive in this country." And so it's really inspiring to have this win and to keep working together for more wins for families. And the last thing I'll say is just something, Sarah, you shared with us when we won, which is, this passed because all of us pushed like hell and we wouldn't take no for an answer. And we have to keep doing that. Thank you. I'll pass it over to Namate at Moms Rising.
Thank you. Thank you so much. My name is Namati Mansouri. I'm a senior director at Moms Rising. We're an online and on-the-ground organization with more than 1 million members throughout the country. And we really engage folks and encourage them to take action in a number of ways. And so as Dina, Sarah, and Eileen mentioned, getting the PWFA passed was a collaborative effort. It was through a grassroots approach where people like many of you who are joining us today supported and pushed for the PWFA. It was also through the continued advocacy and partnership with organizations like A Better Balance and Parents Together, and many others who work to help pass this critical legislation that benefits pregnant and postpartum workers. So over the many years, we explored a number of tactics to urge and demand our members of Congress to vote for and pass this much needed policy. We collected stories through our story bank, from people who experienced pregnancy-related discrimination, similar to the stories from Natasha and Brianne. We compiled them in a storybook, and we shared those firsthand experiences with our elected leaders on the Hill in hopes that they would be compelled to act, to vote, and to finally pass the PWFA. In addition, we had mobile actions where we sent out text alerts, asking our members to call their senators while they were in district, as well as back in DC. We sent out email blasts that reminded our senators to continue fighting for pregnant and postpartum workers by providing much needed workplace supports. We had a letter writing campaign where we sent free packets of pre-stamped PWFA postcards to our members and asked that they write a little message to their senator, thanking them for their support and again, encouraging them to take action by passing the PWFA. And we've also had a few memorable actions. We had moms and families hand deliver storks, not actual storks, but toy storks, along with other materials to district offices. We even had some folks dressed up in duck costumes during Congress's lame duck session, reminding members of Congress to get quacking and pass the PWFA. And really the key to our success was just continued power building and on the ground advocacy. Actions like the ones that I've described where people all across the nation, folks like you, on the ground, those who have needed reasonable accommodations and those who will need them, all working towards a greater good, along with being in great partnership with organizations like A Better Balance, like Parents Together, and our champions in Congress. We were able to get the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act passed. Sarah, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Eileen and Namati. And I think all of these are such wonderful examples of what it looks like when there's real mobilization on the ground and when workers speak out, and creative thinking really when it comes to how to get lawmakers' attention. And now we're going to ask for your help. You'll see here that there is an infographic with some basic information about the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. We're going to be putting out information on all of our organization's social channels. And the ask is simple. Just spread the word. Share this graphic with anyone and everyone that you can on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, on TikTok, on Snapchat. I'm sure there are other ones that I don't know of because I'm not Gen Z, but as far and wide as you can get the word out. The law goes into effect on June 27th, and we want every single person in America to know that this is a new protection that folks have. And Mother's Day is a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to do that and to get the word out. And we'll be sharing this again afterwards, and as well on our social channels. So it'll be super easy, but that's really the main ask of folks today. One thing that I'll flag, and not to get too wonky, is that the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, like we mentioned, or the EEOC, is going to be enforcing this law. They're also going to be putting out what are called regulations on the law, which is basically a fancy way of saying they are going to further explain what various portions of the law mean. And when they do that, they first put out a draft of that guidance or regulations. And when they do that, they open it up for public comment on those regulations. And they invite anyone in the public to comment and to weigh in. And when that happens, it's TBD. We don't know when it will happen, but it could be in the next few weeks, the next few months. that we are going to invite everyone in this space to submit a comment. We're going to try to make it as easy as possible to submit one, but it's important for the agency to hear from folks from the public, from moms, from people who have experienced issues in the workplace or know of people who have, to speak out. So we will be following up with that too, but we just wanted to flag that as something and as another way to really engage. And that'll be another exciting way to make your voices heard. And with that, we just want to say a big thank you from all of us at Parents Together, at Moms Rising, and at A Better Balance. And with that, we want to spend the last 10 minutes going over some questions. We see a lot of questions and a lot of interest, and I'm going to kick it over to Dina first to explain a little bit more about undue hardship, because someone asked about that first.
Sure. So workers have a right to reasonable accommodations under the law unless it would pose an undue hardship. So what's an undue hardship? Typically that it's defined to mean significant difficulty or expense for an employer to provide. So, but that is based, again, that is not, one size fits all. Undue hardship is based on a variety of factors, such as, the cost of an accommodation, the employer's financial resources. So, for example, it likely would not be an undue hardship for a multi-million-dollar corporation, for example, with thousands of employees, to temporarily transfer a warehouse worker to a light duty position, when there are, many non-physically demanding jobs that are likely available for a short period. Likewise, it would probably not be an undue hardship for, a small, 15 or more, but, a company to provide a clerk with, an extra bathroom breaks or water breaks, right? Those things are, it would be exceptionally difficult to show that accommodations so basic that don't cost anything really, or de minimis, would pose an undue hardship on the employer. So hopefully that provides some context. Again, we're talking about a defined period of time, the pregnancy and postpartum period. It's not indefinite, which I think speaks very much to reasonableness, and that I think there will be a presumption that most of these types of accommodations are reasonable, and it will be, the onus on the employer to show that somehow it's incredibly difficult or expensive for the employer to provide it.
Thanks, Dina. Okay, I'm going to jump in on our next question, which is, does this law apply to undocumented workers? And the answer is yes. The law, the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, includes undocumented workers. It defines covered employees the way that definition is used in Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. And the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has long held that workplace anti-discrimination laws cover undocumented workers. While they haven't put out their regulations yet, we firmly anticipate that they will also make that clear, but we very much take the position that the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act does cover undocumented workers. And I'll just speak to another related question in the chat, which was offering our legal helpline services to undocumented immigrants. The answer is absolutely yes. We never ask about immigration status. We find also that because we're not a government agency, people feel more comfortable calling our helpline. And we do offer our services in Spanish, and we are going to work on ensuring that, well, first, hopefully this infographic that we have will be in Spanish, and for our materials at A Better Balance, that we will have those translated into Spanish as well. And we don't have an income cutoff. I saw someone asked about that, but there is no income cutoff for those we will speak with. I know some legal services providers do have that. We do not have that. And I will turn it over to Dina to talk a little bit about medical documentation, because a couple of folks asked about that.
Sure. So with respect to medical documentation, there's not a requirement in the law. in any way. The EOC may, interpret it to include one in discrete circumstances. I think we'll keep folks posted. But no, there is not a stated medical documentation requirement in the text of the law.
All right, thank you, Dina. Someone asked a little bit more, can you speak a little bit more about the process for requesting leave when a worker is not covered by FMLA or other leave laws? So it's really similar to the process that we explained earlier for Rosa when she needed to request an accommodation. It's going to your employer. It's saying, I'm going to be limited after I give birth. I think most employers will understand that there is a period of recovery after childbirth. We have in certain cities and states where they've already said, 6 to 8 weeks is a usual period of recovery after childbirth, but it might vary for some folks. And you go and say, I needed some time off to recover from childbirth as an accommodation. Your employer can talk with you about that. And, if it's incredibly difficult, incredibly expensive, that might not be an accommodation that they can give, but for the most part, most employers, we firmly believe, should be able to give a reasonable period after child's birth to recover as an accommodation. And in fact, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has already put out an FAQ around what can be a reasonable accommodation. They too have taken the position that time off to recover from child's birth can be a reasonable accommodation. And I think this is getting a little bit in the weeds, but under the Americans with Disabilities Act, leave and time off also can be an accommodation. So employers should already be familiar with the idea of a period of leave being an accommodation. So that's what I would say to the process for requesting leave if a worker needs that leave and doesn't have FMLA or doesn't have other job protected leave. Dina, you want to jump in a little?
Yeah, I just see another question because I see we're running out of time and there's a whole bunch here. There was one that I wanted to just jump in and say, the question is the law available in all states? And it reminds me to make the point that, this is a federal law. It applies in states where a Pregnant Worker Fairness Act is already in effect, right? There are many states where these laws have been working for years, as well as states that have no such protection. But it's important for folks to know that because the law aligns with the Civil Rights Act, Title VII, with only 15 or more employees, in some instances, a state or local law could offer more coverage. So in New York, for example, the state law applies to employees with one or more employees. Right. So the city 4 or more. And there, we have fact sheets on that on our website. We'll have a lot of accessible information. You can also just call our helpline if you're unsure. But I did want to flag that those state laws are still in effect. And, the federal law is very protective, but in some instances, if you may be able to turn to a state law for additional protection.
Thank you, Dina. I also saw some folks asked, do you need to have a high-risk pregnancy to get these accommodations? The answer is no. That was the problem we were seeing, is that only folks with very high-risk pregnancies were getting accommodations under the Americans with Disabilities Act. The point of the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act is to accommodate all those with pregnancy, postpartum related needs. So you do not need to have a high-risk pregnancy in order to get these accommodations. Someone also asked about telework accommodations. Yes, remote work, telework can be an accommodation that you request related to your pregnancy or postpartum needs. And a couple of folks also asked about lactation, noting it seems we have an educated group of folks on this call, because some folks noted that the PUMP Act only covers lactation needs for up to 1 year postpartum, but that the AAP has recommended folks breastfeed for up to 2 years. If folks need an accommodation past 1 year, you can request that under the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. If you need break time and space past 1 year, if you need other lactation related needs, again, there is the undue hardship exemption. So you'll have to talk with your employer about making sure it's not too difficult or expensive, but that is an accommodation you can seek if you're continuing to breastfeed past 1 year.
And the one other point that I wanted to make to Sarah's point, it reminded me that a lot of you will probably experience when you're requesting an accommodation, employers handing you disability paperwork, right? Because that's what they know, where you have to prove that you have an impairment or substantially limiting condition, or, and that is not the right paperwork. That you don't need to prove that you have a disability in order to get an accommodation. So beware of that, and you can call our helpline and we'll have resources to help you walk you through that. But just that's an important flag, that this is not an ADA accommodation request. This is a PWFA request, which will look different, internally at your workplace. So.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. We're noticing that the time is running short. I want to thank everyone who joined us today. Thank you, Eileen. Thank you, Marcella. Thank you, Natasha, Brianne, Namati, Dina, of course, Rachel, Sarah Mansura from Parents Together. This was a wonderful collaboration amongst our organizations. We will be following up with lots of materials. So if folks have questions, please feel free to contact us. I'm sorry if we didn't get to all of them, but again, our helpline is here, and you will also have our contact information in the follow-up so that you can get in touch with any questions you may have. Thank you so much for joining us, and please help us again spread the word about the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, and happy Mother's Day to everyone. Take care.